I'm Michael. I'm going to be refuting the claim by Alex Carter that marijuana legalization will be beneficial for this country. I think it's medicinal and recreational as well. On the element. His secondary claims were: number one, there is no reason for it to be criminalized in the first place. Number two, marijuana has many medical benefits. And number three, marijuana can be a great source of tax revenue. So to start with his first claim, to prove that it should be, basically kind of should be legal, which is kind of a policy claim, but he did this comparison between alcohol and marijuana. And in the first part, there's a bit of an evidence issue in that there was no real evidence, because he compares marijuana to alcohol, saying that marijuana is 1/4 the danger, according to the British study that compared all these drugs. But he doesn't give any factual data on either marijuana or alcohol, so we don't know how bad either one is. Alcohol could be the worst thing in the world. It could cause the zombie apocalypse. And if marijuana is 1/4 of that, I don't want it. So really, we still don't know anything about it. There's also a bit of a reasoning claim in there, because the data he shows says that alcohol is the worst of all the drugs. The next four are actually heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, and then regular cocaine, which are all illegal. And then, but he still argues that, well, since alcohol is legal, so should cannabis. Which, by that logic, everything should be legal, because everything is worse than alcohol. And then when you really look at it, alcohol is a bit of an anomaly in there, because the top five, like, are all illegal except for alcohol, which is at the top of the top five. And since it's an anomaly, it's not something that should really be compared to, because it itself is a little bit of a wobbly claim why it's legal. And moving on to his second claim, which was that it has medicinal value. I would like to look at one of the main points that he used, which was a story about a girl named Adeline Patrick. She was a girl with epilepsy, struggling with seizures, and prescription medicines weren't working for her until she took a chemical called CBD oil, which is a chemical in marijuana, and that made her better. And the problem here is that CBD oil is not marijuana. The speaker himself said it's kind of marijuana without the high. It's true, because marijuana has two main parts: the CBD, which stands for cannabidiol, and a part THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and they're very different. A study in JAMA Psychiatry showed that the THC increased anxiety as well as levels of intoxication, sedation, and psychotic symptoms, whereas there was a trend for a reduction in anxiety following the administration of CBD. So while we're not really comparing CBD versus THC, we're comparing CBD versus marijuana. Marijuana has that THC in it, which clearly does just about the opposite of CBD. So marijuana is going to cause something different because it has that. And then he said, he's basically using this claim that CBD helped this girl, but his main claim is about marijuana. So there's no connection there. That whole argument is irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything to us about marijuana. And then moving on to his third claim, which was that tax revenues will help. And he pointed to Colorado a lot. His first, and the evidence that he gave some really large numbers and some impressive numbers that I kind of thought, those don't seem right. And that's because it kind of weren't. Because most of the numbers he gave were confusing and deceptive, in that he said that Colorado, according to a Washington Post article, Colorado pulled in over $700 million from marijuana and marijuana-related sales over 1 year. When you hear that, you think, well, Colorado as the state of Colorado. But in that Washington Post article, it went on to explain that the 700 was for the industry. So the entire marijuana industry in Colorado made $700 million. The actual state of Colorado only made $76 million on taxes, licenses, and fees, which is a fraction, almost a little more than a tenth of what he said. And then he goes on to give a number, to go on about a estimation from a Harvard economist, and he said that approximately $8.7 billion a year of savings would result from legalization of marijuana, and that another $8.7 billion would be generated from taxes on marijuana per year. And those numbers, I checked them. The guy, Harvard economist, knows what he's talking about. But the problem was he never explained what those numbers were for. he was talking about Colorado before that, gave this number, and then talked more about Colorado afterwards, which kind of makes you think this is about Colorado. But in fact, it has nothing to do with Colorado. There was a study done in 2010, before Colorado even legalized, about the entire United States. So those numbers, there's no context to them, and they're just big numbers that really doesn't mean anything to us. So to summarize, I think there was a decent basis of an argument, but the evidence he gave was mostly either lacking, irrelevant, or deceiving.
Right, all the structural stuff is easy to follow. On the first point, you kind of make an argument that I thought was sort of interesting. You know, 1/4 of the zombie apocalypse is still a bad thing. Okay, I see that as being reasonable in a way of diminishing the argument. And I think one of the things that's going on here is that there's a value claim sneaking into the argument here, and I think you might want to point that out, that there's a reason that alcohol is widely available and consumed, and there are reasons why these other drugs are not. And it has, you know, part of it has to do with the risk that it presents, but part of it also has to do with what is seen as being socially acceptable and who's abusing or using these drugs. And I think that there is a difference there that doesn't get discussed very much. You do say alcohol is kind of an anomaly, and you say it's wobbly as a comparative term, but you don't explain why. The very fact that it's legal, I think one of the things you might point out is that we've tried prohibition on those things before, and it didn't work with alcohol, but if you could demonstrate any degree of success with the laws that have prohibited or restricted access to marijuana, holding down consumption levels, for instance, if there was data that said that the usage is higher in places where it's legalized, that would be something that suggests that there is a function in having it legal or illegal, that function has to do with discouraging its consumption, and therefore if there are negative consequences to it, then the law is producing some benefit. On the second point, I think you got a couple of things here that are pretty solid. The notion that CBD is not the same thing as marijuana, I think that's okay, although there's never a demonstration that we can have CBD without the marijuana or vice versa. But the idea that there's not really a connection there, I understand the reasoning argument that you're making there. I think that there's a more obvious reasoning argument to make here, and that is that we're making a generalization out of an anecdotal case here that this has some particular benefit, and we don't know the circumstances of that anecdote. We don't know the conditions under which the medication, we don't even know if this was a placebo effect or not. All we know is that we've got one case. And, by the way, wasn't that an epilepsy case? No. Yeah. Now, we've heard an argument about this. That doesn't help you much. But I'm saying is there any other way that you could address that issue? As I recall, there was some discussion that the other treatments hadn't worked, but I don't quite remember what the advocate's argument was on that particular point. That might have been a way to go and suggest that there are a variety of treatments that were not considered in this situation. And the idea that this was unique, well, I think that's the problem, is that this is a unique set of circumstances that we can say that this is going to be a benefit based on the fact that we've got this one kid who got the CBD oil, which isn't even the same thing. That's a huge generalization to make. The tax issue, I think you're just playing with the numbers here. I think I understand the argument. It's not that significant. That's basically what your counterclaim is. It's not that significant amount of money that we're talking about. At best, we're talking about maybe $8 billion for the whole country. $8 billion wouldn't fund the Defense Department for half a day. That sort of thing. Is it nice to have that amount of money? It would be for you or I. But $8 billion is not going to make or break the government's budget this year or next year. And the notion that there's some huge advantage that comes from that, I think, is maybe diminished a little bit by the argument. But that's about as far as it goes. A lot of picking and pushing at issues. I think you needed to do a little additional research too. All right, thank you.